All right, we're live on YouTube. Carol, I'm sending host back to you.
Thank you.
And UGTV will start in about 4 minutes. We're live on UGTV.
Good afternoon. Before I call the meeting to order, I want to announce that due to COVID-19, we have individuals attending remotely as well as on site. All participants joining by phone should mute their phones when not speaking to avoid background noise. During the meeting, please make sure that you announce yourself by name and title every time you speak to the public that is participating so they know you are speaking. It is critical, given the number of remote participants and his current guidance from the Kansas Attorney General. I'd ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll.
A special session has been called to be held Thursday, May 6th, 2021 at 5:00 p.m. for a legislative update followed by a budget workshop. Roll call. Bynum.
Here.
Burrows.
Here.
Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan.
Here.
Ramirez.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Kane.
Here.
Markley.
Here.
Walters.
Here.
Philbrick.
Here.
Albee.
Thank you. We have two topics for discussion. I will lead off with a legislative update. I'll ask Mr. Bach to present staff.
Thank you, Mayor. Doug Bach, County Administrator. There's been some late-breaking stuff going on in Topeka this week. One item, particularly regarding the COVID property tax business relief bill, with information coming out about that from yesterday into today. We've asked Mike Taylor, who works as our lobbyist in Topeka for us, to come in and give an update on this one bill and as to where things are going and the potential impacts that we're looking at. Mr. Mike, can you move from here? Go from here?
Yes, I got it. Thank you very much. Mike Taylor, Public Relations Director for the Unified Government. What I want to talk about is House Bill 2313, otherwise known as the Retail Storefront Property Tax Relief Act. It is a mega tax bill that got passed out of committee late on Tuesday, was on general orders in the full Senate on Wednesday, and showed up in the House on Thursday. Now, that is to also say that there was no time for really vetting the bill or having any real hearings on the bill where testimony was taken. So let me go through what it does, because it's quite complex and there's a number of bills put into one. So this measure is really designed for small businesses, mom and pop kind of shops. Big box stores, grocery stores, liquor stores, other things are exempted from applying for this. So it's for businesses with 50 employees or less that had a 2019 income between $10,000 and $2.5 million. And they had to have received less than $150,000 in any kind of federal stimulus funds. Now, those businesses could file claims if their 2020 and 2021 incomes for their business were less than the 2019 income. And they would have until June of 22 to file those claims. Each business that files would get $7,500 for 2020 and $7,500 for 2021. The cost for this is estimated at $44 million for losses from 2020, and $30 million of that would come from the state general fund. 14 million of that would have to be paid from county general funds. For 2021, the cost is estimated total cost at 25 million, with $16 million coming from the state general fund and 8 million coming from county general funds. So you don't have to do the math. That's 67% state funding and 33% paid by the counties. The money is intended for businesses who lost profits or money due to COVID restrictions. But one of the things we're very concerned about in reading the language of the bill, because it was put together in such a hurry, is it references any emergency declaration in the future. So that would include natural disasters. So if there is a flood, a tornado, a fire, or we have a microburst that knocks down power lines and trees, and we have to declare an emergency, or the governor declares one for our county, and it closes businesses for a period of time while the cleanup is done, they could then, anytime in the future, also apply for this kind of reimbursement from the state and the county. That's very troubling to us because, as you know, in an emergency, there's almost always a declaration declared, if not by our own emergency manager, certainly by the governor. And that's what allows us to be able to then access FEMA money or small business loan money for those businesses to help reimburse for expenses. So we're really concerned about this section of the bill, and I want to go on and go through the rest of it because it doesn't stop there. They rolled into this something called the Golden Years Tax Act, and it's meant to protect seniors. The way it would work is if you lived in a house up to $395,000 in value and you make less than $50,000 in income, your property tax would be locked in place until the home sold. So even if the assessed value on the home went up, your value would stay locked in at whatever it is on the base year. It's estimated that it would have a $7 million fiscal note in the first year, which would be 2022. And that would compound potentially at $7 million a year for every year thereafter. So the fiscal note could get to be rather large, assuming that values continue to go up. So what that means is, let's just say a 70-year-old person marries a 30-year-old person and the 70-year-old dies. If the 30-year-old continues to live in the house for another 40 years, that tax rate is locked in almost in perpetuity or for those remaining years until the house is sold or the person moves out. And then those taxes would have to be repaid through a sale of the house or relatives that inherit the house. It would eventually be made up, but it could be years before that happens. Another piece is for active National Guard members living in Kansas. They would not have to pay property tax on up to 2 vehicles that they own. So they would be able to be tax-free on 2 vehicles. The other thing that the Senate did, which was very clever, is they still haven't funded public education. So they rolled in the 20 mil tax levy for schools into this bill, hoping that it would push the House to approve it. The House is not real fond of this bill, and I said in a briefing this morning on it, and the House later this afternoon did agree to non-concur in all the things the Senate put in this bill and potentially hold a conference committee on the bill. So we'll see where it goes. We're watching it obviously very closely, but it's going to clearly throw the legislature into next week if they have to meet and try to negotiate this bill. One positive about this is there was also a piece of the bill originally that looked at competition with private business that comes from government or nonprofit services or agencies. Think in Wyandotte County, think Sunflower Hills Golf Course, which is ours, and then there's Victory Hills Golf Course, which is private, and Dubs Dread. Under what was originally proposed, we would have had to rebate 100% of the property taxes on those 2 private golf courses. And this could extend to, we're not sure what all kinds of services, which is why they pulled it out of the bill and have asked, and Legislative Post Audit will be doing an audit of local governments and nonprofits over the summer. And then we'll likely have hearings in the fall to see just how extensive this issue is. So that's House Bill 2313. There's another tax bill I'll mention quickly, which is also troubling. It's Senate Bill 286. It calls for American Rescue Plan funds to be used to reimburse businesses if there were any restrictions in place because of COVID. Now that includes social distancing orders, restricted hours, restricted capacity, complete shutdowns, even mask mandates would be considered under this as something that was detrimental to business. Now, the way they set this up, and it's getting a lot of criticism, there would be a 3-person panel, one appointed by the governor, one by the House Speaker, and one by the Senate President. They would meet in secret and decide what size of award each business would get. The Attorney General would then review those, and he would get to distribute the money. It's estimated by the state legislative research there could be as many as 23,000 claims filed under Senate Bill 286. The state would pay damages for state mandates. Counties would pay damages for any county mandates out of money that they receive from the federal government. Now, the bill will also require that counties set aside 35% of any unspent or unencumbered funds that we might receive from the American Rescue Plan. That actually, as bad as that sounds, that's an improvement, because up until today, it was 100% of the money would have to be set aside to pay those claims. The Senate pushed and got both these bills passed. As I said, no real hearings and no consequential vetting. The House is very lukewarm to both bills, especially coming to them this late in the session. In fact, this morning in the hearing, one representative said, it's like we're boarding the Titanic and these bills are the iceberg. So there is not a lot of enthusiasm on the House side for this bill, or either of these bills. So ultimately, what we're hoping is that the House doesn't act on them, because as you can tell, it would be a huge cost for not only the state government, but for county government. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Commissioner Ramirez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Taylor, for everything you do for us in Topeka and keeping track of everything that is happening. Just like I said with the emergency management bill, these are two pieces of legislation. With the Senate bill that pertains to the American Rescue Plan, I know that the federal government is still providing guidance to state governments and local governments and everybody that's going to receive it. Is the state allowed to dictate how and what we can use that funding for?
Well, Commissioner, that's a very good question. And we don't really know the answer yet, because we haven't received, the state has not received, and we as a local government have not received any guidance from the Treasury Department yet. So it is possible that the federal government could say, nope, you can't use that money this way. But we don't know that yet. In the meantime, this will be in state law. So there is a potential conflict there between what the federal government might tell us and what the state has passed as law, if this in fact passes. That's going to be a major conflict that'll have to be worked out.
Okay. That was when you were talking about the bill, that was the first thing that came to my mind was, through the guidance, are the state allowed to tell us what we're to do with that funding? But my second question, it pertains to the golden years. Correct me if I'm wrong, that was Senator Pittman who introduced that bill, correct?
No, it was actually Senator Tom Holland out of Baldwin City.
Okay.
Douglas County, yeah.
Okay, sorry. I believe Senator Pittman co-signed with him. But
I think. Mm-hmm.
What was the reasoning for Senator Holland's for wanting to introduce that bill?
Well, Senator Holland has actually pushed for this for a couple of years. I think he feels like older citizens, because of values rising and in some places mill levies going up, that older people are being taxed out of their homes, and he wanted to do something to help. There used to be a thing called a circuit breaker for seniors, that if their taxes went up a certain amount, that circuit breaker would kick in and they would get some kind of a tax break through a rebate. This would simply just freeze the value of their home. And it was interesting when this was proposed, there was some kind of questions about how does someone with a $50,000 income live in a house that's $395,000. But those are the numbers that they put in. And he's tried to get this for a number of years. So he actually made the amendment on the floor to blend it in with this House Bill 2313.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. I was just curious on the Senator Holland's thinking on the bill, or his specific portion of the bill.
Right.
I hope the House doesn't approve these bills or vote for these bills as they are. Hope they work with the Senate to make them, I don't even know if they can be even better, but I just hope in the future that legislature wants to work with local governments and ask the opinions of local governments before they start dictating what we can and cannot do. I mean, they do that every day, but especially when it comes to our finances and how we allocate money, I hope in the future that is something that is changed and that they actually meet with us or meet with county administration of all around the state to figure out how this impacts counties. So like I said, I just hope that's something that can be changed in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bynum?
Thanks, Mayor. Mike, on the Golden Years bill, is it Senate Bill 76?
It started out initially as that, but then that didn't advance, and so Senator Holland was able to get it amended into this bill, House Bill 2313.
Okay. So I guess my question is, I had been corresponding with Senator Ethan Corson out of Johnson County about Senate Bill 76, and he had sent a briefing to me that at that time indicated the tax relief portion of that was going to be 100% state funded, and it would come in the form of a rebate when you file your taxes. So is that not the case anymore on that particular?
No, I think, sorry to interrupt. I think that is still the case. So the county would not be, I'll say, on the hook for any kind of actual money, except as values continue to go up, as we've been seeing in Wyandotte County and all over, we wouldn't get the benefit of those increased values.
Okay. So it freezes the valuation and provides a rebate to the taxpayer if they fit in the certain parameters.
Yes.
Okay.
And that would come from the state.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Commissioner McKiernan?
Hello, Mike. Thanks for the information. I guess all the questions will be about the Golden Years legislation tonight. I'm curious, would county appraisers continue to assign a value to each property, even if the value that would be taxed would be frozen?
It's my understanding that they would continue, because under appraisal laws, they have to appraise every property every so many years. So I think, and that would also give us benchmarks of what that property is actually worth, even though the taxes paid would be at a lower level.
Well, I certainly have heard some concern about people who are on fixed incomes in a rapidly appreciating housing market being concerned about how they would pay an increased bill. But I guess a question would be, what would happen if the appraised value of the property fell below the locked-in amount?
I don't think I have a ready answer for you on that. I don't remember that being discussed or written into the bill, but I could check that for you and get you back an answer.
Well, certainly I would appreciate that, because I'm thinking, okay, you lock in, and if it goes up, there is no penalty to you. But what happens if it goes down? So it's all benefit there. And I'm curious, if the housing value at the time of a future sale is higher than the locked-in value, do taxing jurisdictions recover any of that uncollected tax? I don't know, kind of capital gains tax would be somewhat of an analog there.
My understanding is, yes, that someone who bought the house would then have to make up for all of those taxes that didn't get paid because of the rate lock. So eventually, my understanding is eventually we would become whole, but we don't know how many years down the road that would be. But that would come from a new owner who's purchasing that property.
Well, that would add a real interesting twist to the home sale process if you had to disclose and potentially pay taxes from a previous owner. Interesting. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the next topic, budget workshop. Mr. Bach.
Thank you, Mayor. Doug Bach, County Administrator. I'll ask our team to go ahead and load the presentation on. So the next item on the agenda tonight is our budget workshop session. We have several different items to cover. This was planned to be about a 2-hour session to go through this. So that's in addition to what we just added there from the update on the legislative information. I'll go through the agenda for tonight. So new state law is another thing that comes about. While we had the update from Mike, we also have additional changes that are going to affect the way we go through and do our budget this year. So we're going to propose to you some changes to our calendar based on the fact that there's new changes to that. We're also going to do the follow-up on the CMIP that we did not get through earlier. We'll also, then the other items we'll cover tonight is an overview on our debt. As you recall, our budget office did a stakeholder survey out for people to provide input back on the budget, and that's in that. And then we're going to give you some briefing information on the Federal American Rescue Plan Act and some of our thoughts as we're getting more information about that process and working our own process. So to start this off, I'm going to turn this over to Kathleen Von Atchen, who's going to take us through the changes to the budget calendar process with the new state law. Kathleen?
Good evening. I'm Kathleen Von Atchen, the Chief Financial Officer for the Unified Government. And this first item is, as he mentioned, a new state law that changes how we do budgeting with respect to property tax. So in summary, it repeals the current or previous property tax lid law, and that is effective as of the first day of this year. It limits the budget year property tax revenue to the amount levied the prior year, or what they're calling the revenue neutral mill rate. And it also establishes notice and public hearing requirements for entities seeking to collect property tax in excess of this revenue neutral rate. And in addition, the county clerks are required to mail notifications of the intent of the taxing entity to each taxpayer with a property. That mailing of the notification would begin during next year, during 2022. For the current 2021 year, those notifications to taxpayers are to be done via publication in the Echo or the newspaper, or posted on the UG website. So the definition for a revenue neutral rate and what its impact is that basically it's the tax rate for the current tax year that would generate the same amount of property tax revenue as levied the previous tax year using the current tax year's total assessed value. So in other words, under Senate Bill 13, if there is no public hearing to exceed the revenue neutral rates, if no public hearing is held and it's or approved by the commission with a majority vote, then the amount of the property tax levied for 2022 budget would remain the same as it is in 2021. So no revenue growth. So you know, that's going to have a big impact in our budget. And so what we have proposed here with the following slide is if the commission elects to exceed the revenue neutral rate and as a result hold such public hearings as required, then the time frame that the state requires for us to conduct those hearings and then adopt our budget changes. So as you can see, you know, previously, prior to the passage of this bill, starting from the bottom, we had planned on adopting the 2022 budget on July 15th. But if the commission chooses to proceed with the public hearing to exceed the revenue neutral rate, that date changes to September 9th for budget adoption. So as a result, you can see there's almost a 3-month difference there. And so that's because we need more time to do the public hearings and the notices and such. So what we're proposing, if this proceeds, is to continue to have our first 2 budget workshops as they were scheduled, with the May 20th being the budget workshop to talk about the PBB insights and to also talk about our 2020 financial performance. On July 1st is when we would introduce to you how the revenues are doing and a projection of how we expect them to come in for 21 and 22. Then we've added a 4th budget workshop here just to provide more opportunity to discuss various budget items. The final public hearing to adopt the CDBG budget. Usually we have, when we adopt the CDBG budget, we adopt it with the UG budget together. But because the CDBG budget has deadlines that we have to follow from the federal government, what we need to do is actually host or have a specific public hearing just for CDBG in order to meet that August 15th deadline. And so we're proposing that be changed to July 12th. And then we are proposing a change so that the county administrator would present his proposed budget to the commission on August 19th instead of June 24th. And we're proposing a 5th budget workshop to set the maximum mill rate to August 26th. The public hearing to exceed the revenue neutral rate would be held on September 7th, the same day as final public hearing for our budget. So September 7th, and then Thursday. And the reason it's on a Tuesday is because of the holidays on Monday. And then final adoption of the budget on September 9th. So it does, this new state law does dramatically impact our budget calendar. And so I know there's probably a number of questions about this. So happy to field those questions at this time.
McKiernan?
Thank you, Mayor. So Kathleen, just to make sure that I understand this, because I think I'm a little slow here. If we anticipate an appreciation of total valuation, then we would have to calculate a reduction in the mill rate that would yield the same revenue. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Yes.
All right. So the cost of everything we buy is going up, but we're locked into last year's income.
That's right. And of course, subsequently, in the second year, we would still be locked into the 2 years prior.
All right, thank you.
And Commissioner Doug Bach, County Administrator, I'll just say that's why we were proposing the changed calendar, assuming we don't want to box the commissioners in to make a decision today that would assume you could not account for any appreciated revenue. Also knowing that we have some union contracts that are already locked in for increased in costs going into next year as well. So if we just make the assumption we need to go down that path, then you can always set yourself lower, but we would be following process to assume we do have to do the additional publications.
Thank you, Mr. Bach. I appreciate that. I mean, it sharpens the point of how important our projection models are, and how even with the best model, it's a little bit of crystal ball gazing on our part because so many things are not under our control.
Commissioner Ramirez?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Kathleen. I have one question pertaining to the new schedule. By state law, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have to present a certified budget to the county clerk in August. Is that requirement waived in this bill, since we are going past August and adopting our budget in the new schedule in September?
So, if we do not, if we decide not to proceed with holding a public hearing to exceed the revenue neutral rate, then the budget that we're required to submit to the state would still, the deadline would still be August, I think it's 25th. So.
Okay.
So we would need to decide, you know, in the next few weeks, whether that's going to be the approach.
Okay.
For this given year. It's not, you can decide that every year, so.
The state law calls out that once you make the decision, or once you call out the revenue, or once you call out the decision to exceed, then you're exempt from the August 25th, Commissioner.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, and I was hoping was in the bill. But okay, thank you very much. That was my question.
The deadline for taxing entities to tell the clerk that we are intending to proceed is, I think, June 20th. So,
Commissioner Markley.
Thanks, Mayor. This really isn't a question. It's just more of a comment to sort of drive home the point. We project out what we think we're going to make based on our current tax rates. And we anticipate that our values are going to go up because the economy has continued to grow in that way. So I think there are probably, people who might watch this and think, well, this is about raising taxes and they should have to have a hearing if they're going to raise taxes. People are probably feeling like, yeah, go get them. But this isn't about raising taxes. This is about our anticipated revenues based on homes and businesses being worth more. And the reality that we have projected into the future without raising taxes, even, we have projected an increase in revenues because your houses and businesses are worth more. And the state is saying, no, you can't take advantage of that. And as a government, that's really frustrating because we have worked really hard to try to improve infrastructure and try to recruit businesses that will increase the value of all of our properties so that we can take advantage of the tax income and for you, so you can get the value of your property higher, but so we can take advantage of that increase in revenue and provide better services. And the state is telling us, you can't do that. You're not allowed to take advantage of the additional revenues that you are gaining as a result of increasing property values. So it's not the same as raising taxes. And I think it's important to make that point because I think there are a lot of residents who maybe don't use the same vocabulary that we use when we're talking about the budget, and they're thinking, well, I don't want you to raise my taxes anyway. So yes, go through this additional hearing, but this isn't about raising taxes. This is about leaving the tax rate the same and not being able to capture the additional revenue we might get from, say, a new property having an increased valuation.
Commissioner Walters.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. So will it be July 1st when we know when the revenue neutral mill levy rate and the previous year's revenue will all be revealed to us? Is that what's going to happen on July 1st at the third budget workshop?
The county, the UG clerk certifies the assessed value or the appraised value on June 15th. So, we'll know that then. The July 1st was previously when we planned to do the revenue workshop.
Okay. So when will we know the revenue neutral mill rate?
Well, we'll know at the middle of June.
Middle of June. So all of this discussion, is this limited to property taxes, or does it include sales tax and all other taxes?
No, just property tax.
Just property tax. So we're slicing out the property tax. And does it, is there any accommodation for new property tax that is hitting the ledger? That wasn't in, you know, a property that did not exist the year before, but is now coming on the tax rolls. Does it all just get thrown in together?
Yes. Yeah, there is no allowance made for any new development that comes on and adds to the assessed value of the county.
And there's no accommodation for inflation or any adjustment like that. Right, Kathleen?
Right.
Okay. All right, well, so this first time we would be actually using 2020 revenue and comparing it to 2020 projected revenue, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to quibble with Commissioner Markley just a little bit.
Well, actually, it's what we collected in 21 would be what we could collect in 2022.
So this doesn't, okay. So projected 21 and projected 22.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Most people, when they talk about tax increases, they look at dollars. And if their taxes went up $500, that's a tax increase to them. We often confuse it by not, we talk about tax increases and we don't talk about mill levy adjustments. And so I know I've had a lot of people who took great exception when we published that we were cutting taxes and their taxes went up. And that's because we're not very precise with our language. We cut mill levies, we may or may not cut taxes. So I do think we need to be precise, and different people look at it different ways. I think the best way we can help out is being very precise in our language. Thanks.
Commissioner Philbrook.
Well, I'm going to get down into the weeds really quickly here because, for instance, the new Turner Logistics Park that's coming on, it doesn't have its new property value yet. And therefore, does that mean that whatever that property is valued at in the 21 is still going to be what would be paid in 22? Just asking, guys. I'm trying to get really, so I understand this because we're talking about some big developments out there.
Well, so I'm going to let Doug talk about that. The thing
Sorry, guys, but I just, we're talking about a lot of money.
Yeah,
so Doug Bach, County Administrator.
Pilot, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so what you're talking about there is new revenues as they come on the books. So
right.
Anything that we've done some type of incentive in order to grow our community, be it an IRB, a TIF, NRA, as those roll off, they're going to create additional revenue back into our community. So as the individual business that you characterize that's in Turner Logistics, they'll pay whatever our mill rate is when they come off. But what the state's saying is you can't count that. If you did something to incent those to come on, you can't count those as new revenue and pull them in. You need to roll your mill rate back. So if a new company came and they pay $200,000 in new taxes, they're saying lower your mill rate by the equivalent of $200,000. And
they're going to pay the same amount.
Well, they'll pay whatever the corresponding mill rate is that we reduce it to, in order to, if we reduced it to get that. And really, in the end, it's just a publication to come back and say, okay, we recognize last year we made, $100 million. Next year, we're going to get $101 million out of our property taxes. and we can decide whether, and that's where we identify a process. You publish that, you say what it is. By the same mill rate, you're getting that additional million or 5 million or whatever the number is, and say that's what we're getting. And then you're through that process. You give the public a chance to comment on it. The effort there, I believe, by the state is to be very transparent in the amount of dollars we collect, and if we have a cost of living increase that is built in, I shouldn't say built in, comes about, then we post and note what it is. But yeah, it does not, it still charges those new businesses. It just doesn't allow us to account for those as part of natural growth.
So the general fund is dependent on property tax for 30% of its revenue. And of course, the city general fund is 30%. And of course, that supports all of our fire department and our police department, which is the two of those combined is roughly 65% of the total budget. On the county side, the property tax supports roughly 50% of their total expenses, which of course support the sheriff department. So, and jail and detention and courts. So, those, in order to retain our staff, we need to give minimally a cost of living increase. So that's where the rub is, if we have a flat revenue source that is a major source for each of those funds, how are we going to support the cost of living for our important, essential employees?
Well, to what you both have said, it's like, okay, if we thought we were in dire straits before, thank you very much to our state legislature for sticking it to us again. So sorry, but I'm just a little frustrated with the legislators, because I have a feeling it's not going to affect them too much personally, and that is me digging at them. So I better shut up now before I get in trouble.
Commissioner Bynum.
Thanks, Mayor. It's Melissa Bynum, at-large District 1. I'm working hard to wrap my head around this. I do agree with Commissioner Walters on the semantics. We need to be very precise in the way that we talk about taxes. But with regard to this item, I think my struggle is that if year after year, we are only allowed to collect the same amount, where is our incentive to grow our tax base? And how do we ever provide tax relief? So I need a little bit more discussion, I guess.
Well, Doug Bach, County Administrator. Commissioner, we can grow it. Kathleen, go to the next slide that shows the calendar. What this requires us to do is just do additional publications to say we are going to exceed a revenue neutral budget. So it just calls out an additional process for us to go through, publicize it, hold additional public hearings for the comment to come to it. So if we elect to keep our mill rate identical to what it is and it goes up in value by 5 or 6%, you can publish that and say that's what we're doing, and we'll show the corresponding amount of money. So we can grow that way. We just have to go through more process, and then in 22, our clerk will have to send letters or something like that around. There's additional steps we'll have to go through next year to notify our public of what we're doing. So we can do it. We just have to do more notifications and spend a little bit more time and money to do it.
Hey, I wanted to point out that I found a little oversight here. This July 1st should be over here under the new date column. So sorry. Yeah, the revenue review would be July 1st. Previously, we had it scheduled for May 20th. So.
No, actually, I think that July 1st, Kathleen, was the original date for the third budget workshop, if I recall right. That hasn't changed as far as I can remember.
Okay.
I think that's right.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, we're not changing it. So that's why there's a little dash there. But that's when we plan to do the revenue review. Thanks, Mayor.
Yes. Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. Doug or Kathleen, can you, either one of you, tell me how are our neighboring jurisdictions responding to this?
I haven't really had a chance to sit down and talk to them yet. My guess is, well, I will say that, I'll take that back. I have had some feedback from a couple of them. I think most of them are planning just to go ahead and do just kind of make this new budget calendar part of the process. And then you just plan on it. And even if you want to go through the process and you say we're going to exceed it, and then you end up drawing it back, this gives you the alternative to do it. Quite frankly, the good part about the timing is it lets us get all our revenue stuff done and certified in mid-June instead of doing it and having it certified a week before I present the budget to you and trying to follow that kind of calendar. So honestly, from an operational side, other than the fact that we're having to react to it now, working the budget into August, into September is much better for us just to have all our fiscal information done and certified and in hand. So we're not playing a guessing game that I meet with you now and say, well, this is what we think the revenues are going to be. No, we'll be done with that. I mean,
Right.
The capital will be already turned into you. So I think from that aspect, some of the surrounding managers I've had some conversation on this with they like this aspect of it, but you just have to commit to go through all this additional public hearing process.
Gotcha.
And it's not that much. I think sending the letters is a little excessive next year, but we'll figure that out.
The revenue neutral perspective, how would that affect the other taxing entities locally, i.e. KCKCC, USD 500, in terms of their mill levies? Will it have any effect upon them at all?
I believe they're all required to do some additional publications. Kathleen, are you aware of that? I think everyone's required to publish except for the state. The state can just collect their additional property taxes. I don't think they have to say anything, but I can't spend as much time on those. I think they have to say.
Yeah, the bill, as I read it, doesn't exclude school districts, but everyone has to do it.
Gotcha.
So they'll have to do their own
except
process.
the state. Yeah.
Yeah, except the state.
The state's mill rate for us is only 1.5.
Right.
So.
Well, I find this to be a classic case of overreach by the state legislature. And we've been working very diligently and hard to build up our taxing base, which is part of our priority. And if any county needs to build up their taxing base, it's Wyandotte County. So obviously I think we need to continue on with our normal mandate to grow our tax base and not have obstacles like this put in our way, because we've had to maintain a great deal of focus to get to where we are. And I think it's going to take the same amount of focus to continue to grow our tax base, so that we won't be as affected by the ups and downs of the economy as some of our neighboring jurisdictions are. So anyway, thank you so much.
I would just, first of all, I think Commissioner Walter's point is, again, if you're on fixed income and you see that your house value has gone up and you're paying more in taxes, even though we didn't raise the mill levy, it's still experienced as a tax increase. It's certainly an increase in my own taxes. I think if we're going to find anything good in this, it's going to require us as electeds to make a case that what we expend at the county, at the city, really does improve the quality of life. That we are strategic, we are targeted, that we are making sure that the taxes we collect are being used for quality of life improvements. So we can take this as an opportunity to say to folks that tax increases or revenue increases in and of themselves, first of all, are necessary to handle normal cost of living increases, right? That we need to have, we need to bring on additional services, whether it's more code enforcement or whether it's hiring more police officers, whatever the case is, we're going to have opportunities to really make the case for that to the electorate. And so if there's any silver lining in this, I think it is that when we do have a public hearing and we do have to exceed the revenue neutral mill rate, we will have to make the case, this is why this is necessary. Cost of living increases, and or we're doing additional things for our citizens, because I hear many people say to me, we need to be doing more and more and more for our citizens. And then you say, well, of course, but it costs us more money. I hear many people say, I'm willing to pay more. Of course, that doesn't solve the problem for that person on fixed income who has seen their property values increase, but their own cost of living is not keeping pace. That's a different matter. But if anything, I think we need to be aware, as Commissioner Walters pointed out, that with increases in assessed property values, it is experienced as an increase in taxes by people. Our job has got to be to make the case that we are collecting, realizing those increased revenues, and we are putting them to work for you. And if we can do that, if we don't do that, then we're not going to have a leg to stand on. Commissioner Burrows.
Well, thank you, Mayor. It's been a long day in Topeka, and I would state that this is something that was negotiated through the removing the tax lid on local government. I will just state that this is a pretty simple message. Any new tax revenue that is generated from new increase in value of valuation across the community is associated to a reduction in the mill levy if it's to remain the same. If not, you just have to take transparent action to ask for an additional opportunity to raise the mill. And I might suggest to staff that we look at the demographics of our community, that being the senior population within our community, the pockets of our community that are being taxed at the rates they are, including our new developments. And we look at how that impacts our budget moving forward. That gives us an opportunity to be prudent on what we can expect next year. Every new development coming in is raising the value of property in our community. However, we cannot raise the mill. That just goes to in giving us more wealth within the community unless we ask for the opportunity to raise the mill from the public. So I would just encourage us to look at the demographics of our community to help us determine how we go about identifying what are what you, Mayor, stated as the quality of life issues that are important to our community to move us forward.
All right, thank you. We can move on now, I think.
Okay, so the next section is our follow-up to where we are on CMIP. Debbie Johnsher, our Deputy Chief Financial Officer, is going to take us through this section. Ms. Johnsher.
Good evening, Commissioners. Debbie Johnsher, Deputy CFO. This first slide that we're going to talk about, we're going to pick up where we left off with the CMIP meeting last week. So this next slide is to talk about the process for the CNIP program that was previously in place. If you'll recall, CNIP stands for Commission Neighborhood Infrastructure Program. We funded a total of $4 million for the CNIP program. It was funded in 2 rounds from the dedicated sales tax fund. And if you recall, the infrastructure gets 1/3 of the funding from the sales tax revenue in that fund. So it was funded from there. We did $2 million in 2013 and $2 million in 2015. Each round was funded with a short-term financing. And the reason that we set it up this way was that the tax had a sunset, and we didn't want to extend the debt service past the sunset in case the tax was not renewed. So they were set up, each funding was, I believe, a 4-year debt service schedule. The funding was split between each commission district, including the 2 at-large districts, and the projects that were recommended were curb and gutter replacement, sidewalks, trails and walking paths, alleys, park improvements, and community center improvements. That's pretty much how the program worked. I guess if there's any questions on the CNIP program.
Commissioner Townsend.
Good evening, Commissioner Townsend, District 1. Thanks to the administrator and the mayor for putting this on here. I did have questions about it last time. I'm just trying to understand what happened to this program. Did we, the commission, make a conscious effort not to do this again? Seeing as how the funds used to finance it were approved by vote a year or 2 ago, a couple of years ago, maybe it's longer than that now, time goes so quickly. That was the main question I had about it. Is this something that the commission can say yes or no to again? Those are basic questions I had. It seemed to work well for giving commissioners an opportunity to directly attack certain projects in their individual districts. Thank you.
I mean, the answer to that is yes, this is something the commission can redirect the funding. I mean, however much you want to put, $1 million, $4 million, you could, whether it come from the dedicated sales tax fund or from other funding sources, you could put money back into a new CNIP fund.
Thank you.
Commissioner Markley.
Thanks, Mayor. I did like this program. It was nice as a commissioner to have control over the funding. However, I think Doug's word choice was appropriate in that we need to realize as a commission, this would be a redirection of funds that we would have to take out of what we're already spending on infrastructure to dedicate to this purpose. And considering how our funding for infrastructure sits today and the amount of money that we are already short, I don't have an interest in taking money away from our other infrastructure programming for this, although it was a delightful program and I really enjoyed doing the projects in my district.
Can I ask a question of clarification? Mr. Bach, so there were 8 shares and then District 7 was separate. Was there any money set aside? Because I could really see that, so there's some political implications to this, that as a district commissioner, I would want to be able to say, I listen to my constituents, we have these needs in our district, and so I have 1/8 of this money to expend. That would be the same though for the at-large commissioners to have to be able to respond to their constituents, and as well for the mayor. So it would seem to me, if we were going to follow this, the formula could even go to 1 share for each of the district commissioners, and then 4 shares each for the 2 at-large commissioners, and then even 8 shares for the mayor. If this is about trying to meet needs of the people coming forward, because for instance, I get requests from all over the community, and you have to say no, obviously. So why were the at-large commissioners and the mayor not accounted for in this?
Mayor, I will say that the at-large commission districts were included. It was split 10 into 10, all 10 districts. There was an adjustment to District 7 so that it only included areas within Kansas City, Kansas, since this was a city sales tax. But all 10 districts were allocated funding.
I see. Okay. I see Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I just have a few comments maybe to think about. I wasn't with the team when this program was going on. I did come on as it was finishing up. I think about, I guess I'm guessing there was maybe a strong desire to do this kind of thing because of the needs, and I understand that. So I'm going to say that if we are able to figure out how to increase funding to street preservation, to curbs, and to the sidewalk cost share program, that over time, and we stay data driven about it, that over time, I think there will be less feeling that we need to do this kind of thing. We weren't doing curbs as a part of our street preservation program then. We have been doing that, and the level of funding to the sidewalk cost share is really low. So I just wanted to make those comments and give you all something to think about. Thank you.
Commissioner Walters.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify a couple things. One, District 7 did get a reduced amount initially. That was changed by the commission so that District 7 got an equal amount to all the other districts. And also Mayor Holland got a share also. My recollection is there were 11 even shares.
That was my recollection.
Thank you. Commissioner Philbrook.
Yeah, although I really did like being able to do some really fun stuff for and well-needed stuff for some parks in District 8. I believe that as a commission, we decided to not do it anymore because we thought we needed to spend the money across the whole city and make a more, planned, structured approach to caring for the community overall with infrastructure and so on, like Commissioner Markley indicated. And it was a tough decision. It wasn't easy because it was right around when I came on. And I still have to go along with that. Don't get me wrong, I have plenty of things I could probably spend it on like we all do. But in the midst of us having, seeing that we know we have a decrease, or shouldn't say decrease, but not an increase, and costs are going up, dividing the pie again, I believe could possibly make things a little bit more difficult for us to approach everything in a concerted, organized effort for the whole community. Thanks.
Commissioner Bynum.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Johnsher, I'm going to ask you to offline within the next couple of weeks, research for me the expenditures for at-large District 1, because your slide says $2 million in 13 and $2 million in 15. And I took office in April of 15 and was under the impression that there were no CNIP dollars available to me, that they had all been expended. And if that's the case, then they were all expended in the first 3 months of 2015. So I would like an accounting of that when you get a moment.
Okay. Yes, we can do that. I do know that the projects, they were for budget years 2013 and 2015. However, the projects were, if I'm recalling, along with the schedule we did for all of our other debt projects, the projects would have been approved for 15 in the fall of 2014.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if that may be the reason the projects had already been decided on. But I can definitely double check that and find out what was spent.
I would appreciate that because there was no at-large commissioner District 1 between 2013 and 2015. So I would be curious to know how that allocation was spent and by whom if the seat was vacant. So okay. Yes, please. Thank you.
I will definitely check on that.
Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Townsend, District 1. You know, from during the first term that I was in, came in 13 up until maybe about last year, when I lost a family member, I hadn't missed any of the commission meetings. So I do not recall any time that we consciously made a decision to do away with CNIP. It went away, the funding or the way it was funded was renewed. So I don't recall us ever making a conscious decision to do that. I do understand trying to do infrastructure, which is what a lot of the money that I used was used for and or parks. So I appreciate we're trying to do something that will improve the city overall, but as you improve each district, the city is strengthened. So I would just like to see what we could do overall and by district, even if we have 1 million, if we did 2 million in 2013 and 2 million in 2015, what would even 1 million look like divvied up? And the reason I say that and go back to this is it is just so hard to continue to have to tell constituents, well, we can't do this curb and sidewalk here, even though you haven't had an update for over, 10, 15, 20 years, because we've got this overall more global approach. The constituent wants to know, well, when is our time coming? And that was the beauty of the CNIP project. So I would like to just know what even 1 million CNIP pot would look like, divided up equally. And each of us could point to that sore spot in our district. If you don't have one, God bless you. But I know I've got some that people want to see attended to. And this way you can make sure that attention is given to a particular spot. So again, I thank the administrator and the mayor for putting this item on this workshop. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
I think the next section is going to be covered by Jeff Fisher, Director of Public Works.
Thank you, Debbie. There's 2 slides here worth of projects. It's a list that, for the most part, you've seen a few times. It's a result of that new scoring and ranking system, and doesn't include everything that you might hear or know about. There's projects that are developing that are at various levels of evaluation and scoping, And so like Leavenworth Road walkability out in the out west, and then the Cesar Chavez Bridge and Central Avenue Bridge and 12th Street, they're all at various levels of evaluation. So, and then remember, this project is only made up of projects of $200,000 or more, with the exception of one that was at 190. Close. They're mostly capital in nature, truly capital. A lot of them are road projects, linear projects, bridges, streetlights. There are a few vertical, and this year there were 6 projects or 6 requests that weren't funded that included increases in street preservation, bridges, concrete repair, and then there were animal services project, court services, and animal services and court services are not in here, but they will be plugged in. Animal services, we believe, will actually rank in the top 10 for your information, and court services is a little bit unique, so we're having trouble figuring out how to score that one. So we can go to that next slide. I think this year's requests but not funded list is much shorter for a few reasons. The current financial picture, I think staff's ultra sensitive. And then the core teams that the budget department developed or created has done a really good job of vetting requests. And then we've got a higher focus on maintenance, which is, I think, a good idea for now. And then some requests are really, that have been the types of requests over the recent past that were made this year were really operational in nature and not truly CMIP. So the budget team did a good job of vetting those and pushing those into operations as much as possible. I believe that's all I have. I'll answer any questions if you have some.
Yeah. So kind of run me through the process here. So who did the rankings here?
Well, it's staff. It's Robbie Anderson, our asset manager. It's Troy Shaw. It's Sam Herr. We all have some part in plugging those into that system and scoring them. And then they're just ranked in priority order based on their score.
And so in the criteria used, does it include whether this is, I've been using this language and it could be wrong, but when we're looking at infrastructure, emergency things that must be done, if they're not, they will fail and cost more to repair. And then there are certain things which are more urgent that if we don't take care of them, let's say 5 to 7 years, they will become emergency situations. And then longer term, just aesthetic improvements or quality of life improvements, but that are not really urgent necessarily or emergency. So for instance, if you go back one slide. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go back to that. Nope. Go forward. The Key Lane, one more. Go ahead and do one more. I'm sorry. Yes. So Key Lane, Douglas Avenue to Gibbs Road, 3.2 million. That's only getting us from Key Lane South to Gibbs Road. And then Douglas Avenue, Key Lane to 55th Street. That's another $3.2 million. So that road is in terrible shape. I hear it from the neighbors all the time. And where is that in terms of, is that an emergency need, is an urgent need? And I'm not advocating for this particular improvement, it's just one I know about. What happens if we don't do that improvement?
Well, you might remember the criteria. There are a certain set of criteria: safety, costs, return on investment, those kinds of things. And the commission weighed in on how to weight those criteria. And you might recall from the very beginning, I think we agreed it would take 2 or 3 budget cycles to really fine tune this system, and we can adjust the criteria each year in that process. And so urgency, and then there's a human element, and so as good as the system is, it's not perfect, and so we need to recognize other things like urgency and deterioration, maybe that the system isn't picking up quite as well as we would like. And so we have to make those judgment calls on certain projects with your guidance, of course.
But what you're showing us here are things that we don't have the money for, and we don't even know when we'll have the money for that. Is that correct?
It is correct. Yeah, I mean, our capital load, like we've discussed in recent past, if you look at our 5-year CMIP, it really is not made up of a large portfolio of truly capital projects. It's really a small portfolio. There's a lot of maintenance type of activities, and a lot of it's facilities and street preservation. We're already spending, I think, in that 21 amended and on up to 2026, it was around 75 million, and that for street preservation, and we know it needs to be 20 plus a year. So, but I think there are 62 million in facilities. That's a large chunk of money for CMIP. So I think reducing facilities where we can will be an excellent strategy.
Thank you. Commissioner Markley.
Thanks, Mayor. We had, Jeff Fisher and I had this conversation about the Key Lane project in particular, because I had concerns about the high school football field, which of course didn't get used as much last year as one might have hoped, but they have a new field. And so the traffic pattern has changed because the field used to be on Sports Road for those who aren't familiar with the area, and now it is up next to the high school. And I anticipate that on football nights, there's going to be a significant amount of traffic up and down that road that is already a problem. So I do recall all of our efforts as a commission to decide what the scoring criteria should be and decide how those criteria should be weighted. But there are other elements that can play in, like proximity perhaps to something that might produce additional traffic that may or may not be falling into our criteria. So our discussion at the time, I think, was just that we as a commission also need to monitor the criteria that we have set to make sure that we are capturing the things that are most critical to us and to our residents, so that when staff is scoring these, and I appreciate the objectivity of this scoring system and the fact, can I just say once again, folks, the fact that we have a list, because that didn't used to happen. We didn't used to have a list, let alone have it ranked. So I appreciate the process, and I appreciate the objectivity that this lends us as we're trying to analyze which projects rank where, what the highest priorities are. But I do think it's critical that we continue to refine and fine tune to make sure that we are identifying all of those little parts and pieces that might make a project more critical, so that we make sure that we are in fact hitting on the right priorities. And I'm not necessarily saying that Key Lane should be number one, but as we were discussing it, I think Mr. Fisher just commented that sort of idea that there's going to be a new football field there wasn't necessarily captured in the ranking at the time, because the football field at that time wasn't done, and the traffic pattern hadn't changed. So those just might be things that we want to keep on the radar, how to handle future changes and things like that as we try to rank these.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Harold Johnson, District 4. Jeff, the items that are under the NRSA that are showing up as unfunded, I think it's fourth from the bottom, $2.68 million. Are those considered to be more discretionary items relative to the overall project itself? I think we're in maybe the last year, or the second to the last year of funding overall for those for the NRSA project. Can you or anyone speak to that?
I could try, but if Melissa is on the call, she might do a better job. And it's hard for me to remember all the details of all the projects. So I don't remember this one for sure.
Commissioner, so these are future NRSA improvements that are showing on here. These are ones in the parks. So things that we are looking to finish up in the next year are improvements at Clifton Park, including relocation of a playground there, removal of the old street that runs through the park that was closed off many years ago to the neighborhood on the east, redoing driveway, sidewalks around that park. And then we're also looking at a spray ground due to the money that we still have available. This will complete all of the work on the play structure and at the city park fields that we put in, as well as the new bathrooms that we did there. I believe there's also a new bathroom up at the top of City Park. And then of course, we also had improvements over at Reagan Park. So that's really what this will button up here for the rest of the time that we're working in this area.
But we don't have funding for it. So am I misinterpreting that, or?
No, this is funded.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what this is on the unfunded. That's very confusing to me. I'm sorry, but no, these are federal funds.
It might just not have been removed yet. I couldn't remember the details of this.
Yeah.
So that needs to be removed then.
Yeah, it's done or being done or will be done in the next year to year and a half.
Okay, so that's going to be removed from this unfunded list because there are funds still allocated for those items.
Yeah. In fact, we just met on them again the other day.
Great, wonderful. And I just hate to do this, but second to the bottom, Leavenworth Road. Leavenworth is spelled incorrectly. Sorry, guys. I was third grade spelling champ, and I'm just cursed with it. Thanks, Mayor.
Third grade, yeah. You didn't...
Yeah, it's a curse,
All right, okay. Commissioner Philbrook.
Well, thank you, Commissioner, for taking care of Leavenworth Road for me. I so appreciate that, Commissioner Johnson. So to go off on another direction, because we know these are unfunded. So the monies that we're looking at possibly receiving for infrastructure from federal down through the state to us, where are we looking? Have we thought about where we're looking at spending that, or would any of these possibly fall into that category? Or are we looking at beefing up what we're doing in stuff that we're already working on? Jeff?
Sure, that's a good question. Staff has been looking at opportunities depending on what that infrastructure bill looks like. We've got sort of a short list and have submitted that for even earmarks, if we're successful with that. So yeah, we're using this list, and then things that aren't on this list, like Cesar Chavez Bridge, which is a very, very large project, and then 12th Street Bridge and those kinds of things that might score highly on those kinds of infrastructure opportunities.
Do we have any idea what kind of monies are possible for us to get, Jeff, or is that just all pie in the sky yet?
Yeah, I don't have any idea really.
Okay. Well, thank you for the information.
Well, actually, we will probably speak to that a little bit more when we get to the American Reinvestment Act, but there's a lot of money out there, so opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Next item.
Okay, we'll move into our debt overview section. This is one where kind of coincides with capital, as many items are put into debt. We've held ourselves at a cap on how much we want to put into debt each year. I'll turn this over to Debbie. I believe you're doing this too, right?
Yes, Debbie Johnsher, Deputy CFO. So the next several slides are going to be an overview of the current debt, the financing that supports our investment in public infrastructure and facilities.
Debbie, make sure you're up close to the mic. You're a little faint.
Okay, can you hear me now?
It's a little better.
Let me try, scoot this closer. Is that better?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'll try to speak loud. This next slide is the current and future city debt by source. the graph shows the total outstanding debt issued for the city of Kansas City, Kansas. As you can see down on the graph, the blue represents the, which is the largest part currently, represents the city general obligation debt, followed by the brown section, which is the sewer debt. As you will notice, we've got the graph here going from 2020 to 2040, and you can see that as we move out, the general fund backed debt remains relatively flat. We have estimated future debt at 15 million per year, but you can see that as we get out into the future years, about 10 years out, the sewer portion does start to grow. And that is due to the additional projects that will be coming on related to the sewer consent decree.
So Debbie, if I may, just to be clear, this assumes that there would not be, under the sewer and stormwater, this assumes that there would not be any opportunities through the infrastructure plan to offset some of those costs, correct?
In the, I'm sorry, say that, the sewer and stormwater.
Back to the point that Commissioner Philbrook was raising is we're assuming with the sewer cost here and what we'll have to fund there, if this would have happened if we simply have to go it alone, but if there is a possibility for us to access some federal funding through what may be coming through an infrastructure, that may decrease.
Right. Yes, this I think this just assumes what we had in our current CMIP plan going forward, and I think we've just estimated that out with the additional projects we think that will occur over the next 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
So the next slide is the same information as the previous graph, but it's just for the city general obligation debt only. So this is outstanding debt, and the blue represents the current debt that has already been issued. And as you can see, it decreases over time, zeroing out around 2040. And the green represents the future debt that's issued. And as I said before, we're assuming 15 million per year for the city debt. That's a level that we've talked about, you know, over the past several years at maintaining that level, the 15 million. So the direction that's what we've built in. And you can see that in 2020, we're at about 270 million. And we're estimated when we get out to 2040 to be at around 245 million. The next slide. The next slide shows the current and future annual debt service. So this is the payments that we're making on the debt that is outstanding. Once again, the blue represents the current debt that has already been issued, and the green represents future debt service payments on the annual 15 million that we would be making every year. The red line is the revenue that is generated by the mills to cover the debt service within the city debt service fund. As you can see on the graph that in 2028, we do start to see a gap between the revenue that's generated by the mills and the expenses. And so we're estimating that property tax mills could be reduced from an estimated 2.5 mills in 2028 all the way up to 12 mills in 2040 if it remains on this projection. Next slide. This one is just showing the 2021 approved city mill levy. And as you can see that the mill is 38.5 mills. And of that, the debt service fund gets 44% or 17 mills. And the general fund gets 56% or 21 mills. This one is just showing a history of the city general fund and debt service mill rates. The bar graph, the gray, is showing what the city mill rate is all the way back for the past 15 years. And the two line graphs are showing represent the percentage of the mill. So the blue graph represents the city general fund, and the orange graph represents the bond and interest fund. And I'll just note that back in 2006, the general fund had 66% of the city mill levy, and the debt service had 34%. As you can see in 2020, that has shifted, and the general fund has 56% of the mills, and the bond and interest is 44%. We'll also note that from 2017 to 2019, this also reflects the 2 mil decrease that was made in the city mill levy.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Burrows, you have a question?
I do, Mayor. Thank you. Commissioner Burrows, District 2. Might I suggest that we look back to the inception of the consolidation of government when we look at some of these graphs as to the complete mill reduction, so that we have an opportunity to see collectively, and the public has a chance to see the consolidation benefit in reference to not only the mill reduction, but and/or debt service. It's just a suggestion, Mayor. I thought I would throw that out there for consideration.
I believe we have that information. Yes, we could provide that. Okay, and then the next slide is our last slide for debt, and this is the current and future annual debt service for the county debt service fund. Once again, the blue represents current debt that's already been issued, and the green represents future debt. For the future debt estimates, we built in an estimated $2.5 million in new projects to be issued each year. And for this one, same, the revenue, the red line represents the revenue to be generated. So as you can see, starting in 2024, we start to see a gap between the revenue and the expenses that could indicate that we could potentially reduce property tax mills ranging from maybe $0.5 mil in 2024 all the way up to 1.5 mils in 2040. And that's all the slides on the debt service. If there's any questions.
Mayor, if I may, Doug Bott, County Administrator, I think the last point that Ms. Johnson made is really good. That by staying the course, I know when you look at it on the city side, it takes a few years to get out there, but it takes a lot of years to overcome debt and how much was invested to get out to 28. But on the county side, as you can see, this graph that we were on, we're getting, it's right there in 2023 where you start to see that separation of what the revenue produces, what the need is. So we'll be able to move into that, and you'll be able to, here you're able to reduce the mill rate without having to reduce operations by decisions you've made over the last few years affecting this. And that's what we have on debt.
Commissioner Markley.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, you look at it on this slide and it doesn't look that exciting, but I feel like there should be little party horns or something, because this is a big deal to see sort of the light at the end of a long tunnel. And this commission has put some priority on not creating as much debt. And we finally are gonna, not this year, but soon, before I'm old, we are gonna reap the benefits of those decisions. And that is huge. That's huge. I mean, look at those numbers, 12 mils in 2040. That's amazing. So it's just good to see. Sometimes it feels like we're just digging ourselves out of a dark hole and we're never going to see the top. It's just good to see these slides showing that there is a light at the top of our hole, and we are trying and have been trying for many years to have debt related policies that help us dig out of that hole.
Thank you. Okay, next topic.
Okay, I believe we are ready to go to the stakeholder survey that our budget department did, to go out and ask our employees, ask our residents about where we thought, as we do the public hearing process, this was just another step to go and get additional information and Mr. Lindsay and his team are here to share that with us today. Reginald?
Good evening, everyone. Last September, Budget and Strategy started engaging and informing the community around budget topics on Facebook in hopes that we could build up to getting a broader public perspective on our budget priorities. We leveraged our first public hearing to give the community a voice in the 2022 budget process by rolling out a more robust digital option, allowing citizens to engage with us around the budget process. Michael Peterson, our Assistant Budget and Strategy Manager, along with our Vista intern, Trey Britwell, who is a graduate student at George Washington University, and a recovering budget analyst, Desiree Bush, who is now the Physical Manager at the Department of Aging, are going to present the budget survey to you. But before I turn it over to our presenters, I'd like to thank Mike Grimm, our Research Manager, and Ashley Hand, our Strategic Communications Director, for teaming up with us on this process.
All right. Good evening, Mayor Alvey, Commissioners, County Administrator Doug Bach, and Assistant County Administrators. Citizens and organizations had an opportunity to provide written comments on budget priorities and initiatives for the adoption of the Unified Government proposed 2022 budget by submitting a survey. The survey is used to obtain community input that serves as a relevant and reflective document of our community request. Next slide. We have, could we go back one, please? We held our first public hearing meeting on March 11th. During the meeting, 5 citizens participated by providing input on budget priorities and initiatives. In prior years, we advertised a fillable PDF survey on the UG webpage and other outlets such as eNews, Livable Neighborhoods newsletter, and Nextdoor app. Well, this year, we took a more innovative approach and recreated an online version of our survey. We also added a media outlet platform such as Facebook. In addition, we created a QR code to enhance our community input, and we advertised that QR code on flyers and poster boards throughout public-facing areas. Lastly, we created a separate survey for UG employees, and compared to prior years, we received the most number of surveys this year. Next slide. Here's a snapshot of our QR code flyer. The flyer was distributed throughout City Hall and at the courthouse. We also created poster boards that were displayed at various locations, such as the Police Department headquarters, Treasurer's Office, NRC, and our vaccination sites. We also kept our original fillable PDF survey for those that may have missed our online version of our QR code advertisement. So this is the first year we created an internal budget input survey. We used the platform, the same platform as our citizen survey, which was open forums, and we received 83 submissions. Our human resources department assisted us in advertising our internal survey, and the submission deadline remained the same. As I mentioned, 5 citizens participated in the public hearing held on March 11th. They are as follows. Carolyn Wyatt, who is a citizen, would like us to fund community center programs for youth and seniors. Dorothy McField, who is a citizen, was not present during the meeting, or at least when she was called upon, she did not answer. Dustin Haar, who is the director of Wyco Mutual Aid, would like us to fund more community homeless shelters. Marsha Rupp, who is a citizen, would like to see lower property taxes and for us to maintain the streets of Parallel Parkway, and she supports our public safety department. Lastly, Marge Gasnick, who is a citizen, would like us to conduct a public safety budget review. So this year, we received the most number of surveys submitted in comparison to prior years. The years on the bottom of the graph represent the approved budget. For the proposed 2022 budget, we received 145 surveys. The online version QR code of our survey was quite beneficial in receiving this number of surveys. We also received 83 submissions from UG employees, totaling 228. The approved 2021 budget survey was impacted primarily due to COVID, as surveys were due on March 13th of 2020, and that was the time frame we started to face city closures. In addition, we did not implement an online version last year, so we ended up receiving only 13 submissions. We received 48 submissions from our approved 2020 budget, and lastly, 15 from our 2019 approved budget. For our external input, 75% of participants wanted to share a comment or opinion. 25% submitted a project initiative. For our internal input, 92 respondents wanted to share a comment or opinion, while 8% shared a potential project initiative idea. As I mentioned, 108 external participants chose to share a comment. We categorized the comments based on 15 separate categories. The majority of the remarks prioritized decreasing taxes, sidewalk improvements, and street improvements. Mid-range comments prioritized public safety, park improvements, budgetary increases, investment in community health, and general community projects. And on the lower scale, citizens prioritized senior services, mental health, affordable housing, and addressing homelessness. 77 internal participants chose to share a comment. We categorized the comments based on 15 separate categories. The majority of the comments prioritized salary and budgetary line increases, also public safety. Mid-range comments prioritized internal policies, infrastructure projects, taxes, street maintenance or improvements, parks, general community projects, and healthcare. And on the lower scale, employees prioritize sidewalk improvements, health, senior services, and mental health and housing. 36 external recipients requested funding for a project. 5 associated themselves as a community organizer. 21 described themselves as an interested individual. 10 were representative of a nonprofit. The count per category on the right represents the number of requests per project initiative. For internal project initiative submissions, we received 5 internal project initiatives. 1 submission was broken out into 2 separate projects. That's why we see 6 separate boxes here. So now we'll go into the citizen stakeholder budget input survey from our participants. We asked respondents if they were a Wyandotte County resident. Out of 145 responses, 117 responded yes, 24 preferred not to answer, and 4 responded no. And of the no respondents, 1 defined themselves as a community organizer, and 3 associated themselves as an interested individual. Of the 145 participants, 114 defined themselves as an interested individual, 20 represented a nonprofit, 7 described themselves as a community organizer, and 4 defined themselves as a representative or a owner of a business. The following is a list of 20 organizations that participated in the Citizen Community Stakeholder Input Survey. The count on the right-hand side indicates the number of submissions from the organization. Representatives of Rosedale Development Association submitted 4 separate submissions in support of Rosedale infrastructure improvements. 2 submissions were in support of Rosedale park improvements, and there was 1 in support of neighborhood beautification. So we asked participants, how did they hear about our survey? Majority selected other. However, we did not include if a participant learned of our survey via our advertisement of our QR code. So we think that 37% range could be largely associated with this. 21% learned of our survey from Facebook, which is equivalent to 30 individuals, and between 13 to 15% from e-news and word of mouth. On the lower scale, between 3 to 6% from livable neighborhoods, Nextdoor app, and the UG webpage. Now we'll transition into the Unified Government Employee Budget Input Survey results. We received feedback from 20 departments. We received 11 submissions from Public Works Department, 10 from both the police and the health department, 9 from the sheriff and fire department, 6 from the finance department, 5 from community corrections, and on the lower range, we received between 3 and 1 submissions from urban planning and the county administrator's office. Now let's take a look at the external and internal demographics such as zip code, age, race, and gender. From the external, we received the majority of the surveys from the 66109 and 66103 zip codes. In mid-range, we received between 11 and 19 submissions from 66106 through 66111. And on the lower range, we received between 1 to 7 submissions from 66112 through 66205. From the internal, we received the majority of the surveys from 66109 and 66101. And mid-range, we received between 4 and 8 submissions from 66102 through 66102. And on the lower range, we received between 1 to 2 submissions from 66103 to 64012. For the gender, the blue bar represents our external count, while the orange bar represents our internal count. For external, 45% participants were female, 31% were male, and 24% preferred not to answer. For internal, 31% of the participants were female, while 42% were male, 26% preferred not to answer. For our age group, externally, 21% of respondents were between the ages of 60 to 69. 14% of contributors were between the age group of 30 to 59. 10% of submissions were from the 70 to 79 age group. And on the lower range, we received between 6% or lower from the 18 to 29 age group and the over 80 age group. For internal submissions, 25% of respondents were between the ages of 30 to 39. 18% of contributors were from the 40 to 49 age group. And lastly, on the lower scale, we received 12% from the 18 to 29 and the 50 to 69 age groups. For the external submissions, 50% of participants identified themselves as white, 28% preferred not to answer, 12% were Black or African American, 6% were Hispanic, and lastly, on the lower range, we received less than 4% from other categories such as 2 or more races, American Indian, and Asian. For the internal submissions, 49% were white, 30% preferred not to answer, 12% were Black or African American, 7% were Hispanic, and lastly, for the lower range, we received less than 2% from the other categories such as 2 or more races, American Indian, or an Asian. This concludes my portion of the presentation. Now I'll hand it over to Trey.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about the comment section of the surveys. So we created a word cloud to summarize the top words that were used. So a word cloud, it's based on frequency. So the more it's used, the larger you'll see it here. So the top words for the citizen survey were streets, sidewalks, taxes, parks, budget, fund, health, and businesses. So I'm going to summarize each of these slides of the comments, and you'll be able to read these comments in the briefing packet that you received. And got to point out that a lot of these comments, there's differing views of each of these issues. And so for sidewalks, we got a lot of comments talking about repairing a lot of the sidewalks throughout the county, as well as building new sidewalks in areas that there aren't currently any. As well as specific areas such as neighborhoods that people would like to see repairs done. So then for taxes, we saw a variety of comments on this. So there's some people that said don't raise taxes or taxes are too high. But then we also had a lot of other people say that they don't mind taxes at the rates they are now, as long as they're seeing high quality services for the community. And then for streets, we saw a lot of repair requests for specific areas, as well as just general areas throughout the county. So things such as curbs, potholes, and stuff like that. And then we also had some project requests in the comments. So the top one says, I feel as a whole community, we need to be able to vote on projects and such. And then the bottom one talks about encouraging active living lifestyles in the community. And then we also had a lot of budget recommendations. So the top person talked about they're uncomfortable with the amount of money being spent on policing and not spent on parks. And then the bottom comment talked about they'd love to see the budget include anti-racism training for all government officials. And then we also received a lot of comments about businesses, such as tax rates, as well as programs that would help support small businesses that have been in the community for a long time. And then as far as health, we got some comments about fully funding the UG's Community Health Improvement Plan, as well as investing in the health department and health throughout the community. And then we also received comments about COVID-19 and the vaccine rollout. And then for parks, we received a lot of specific comments, such as certain areas of parks, such as this one with Wyandotte County Lake. They talk about, they want to pave the path, as well as better playground equipment, things like that. And then for the employee survey, we saw a stark difference in the words that were used. So the common words in this one are work, pay, increase, raise, police, fire, fund, health, and tax. So the most common words are raise, increase, pay, and work. And a lot of these centered on pay increases, as well as bonuses that a lot of employees would like, as well as better insurance options for employees and the increasing costs that they've had to pay on insurance rates. And then for police, we got a lot of a variety of different comments. So we had some people that said they'd like to see an increase in the budget for the police department to have more police officers. And then some people said they'd like less funding for public safety and see more money going to programs that they think would directly help the community. And then for the employee side for taxes, we saw a lot of employees say they'd like to see a decrease in taxes or just not any raises in taxes. And then for health on the employee side, we saw that a lot of people want more money budgeted to the health department, as well as for preparing for future health crises and things like that sort. Then we had some funding requests. The top comment talks about they'd like to see funding not go to things like the baseball park at Legends and go towards employee bonuses. And then the bottom one talks about they'd like more money budgeted to healthcare for employees. And that concludes my section. Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners. It's Michael Peterson, Assistant Budget Manager. So basically, I'm going to cover the prioritization feedback that we received through the citizen survey quickly. So on the survey, we asked respondents to rank the following priorities from highest to lowest. So included in the question were the 7 strategic goals, as well as the additional question of lowering the tax rate, just because we get that request significantly. Out of the surveys, we had quite a good response rate on this question. So of the external surveys, 97% of the respondents answered this question, and internally, 96% answered this question. This was not a required question to answer. So again, from the internal UG survey, you can see that we have a good representation across the unified government from the different functional areas of the government. So these are the same functional areas that you see in the budget document when we go through the budget each year. And then externally, we put the addresses on a heat map, and you can see that the responses came from a wide variety of locations across the county. So what were the results? Externally on the next two slides, you're going to see the scoring priorities broken out by the top two priorities. The next two priorities following are orange. The lower two after that are gray, and then the bottom two priorities are yellow. So, and we combine this into a weighted score. So externally, the top three priorities were infrastructure, economy, and safety. And the last three priorities were lowering the tax rate, cohesion, and communication. Internally, we had slightly different results. So the highest priorities internally were once again infrastructure, but then tax rate and safety took the place of economy. And then the lowest priorities were blight, communication, and cohesion. So this is just a comparison between the two, the internal and the external surveys. So here you can see that there's a higher priority internally on the tax rate. The lower the score, the higher priority it is. This is 1 being the highest, 8 being the lowest. And there was a higher score on safety, but externally, that higher score was on economy and safety. So these are the top priorities. So this is just the people that ranked it most important, which is basically ranking of 1 or 2 on the priorities. So 38% of the external survey participants said infrastructure was the highest priority, followed by economy and safety. You see lowering taxes is right here in the middle. We overlaid this with the bottom priorities. So this is priorities of 7 or 8 on the survey. So interestingly to us, you kind of expect the bigger the blue bar, the smaller the orange bar. But you see lowering the tax rate was kind of a polar response where you had a lot of people ranking it as a top priority, but you also had even more of the external survey respondents ranking it as the lowest priority. So that was just an interesting thing that we saw. Granted, I guess take it that this is only 139 individuals out of the community. So just the people who chose to take our survey. Internally, you see tax rate was the highest priority, followed by safety and infrastructure. Again, even though tax rate was the highest priority, it also has a significant number of lowest priority rankings associated with it. At the bottom on both the internal and the external is cohesion and communication goals. And then this is just a comparison of the two. So you can see top priority, the higher percent for tax rate for external or for internal. And then this is a comparison of the bottom responses. So just I'm going to explain what this is. It's also in the presentation that we gave out, but this is just the percentage of times each goal scored either lower or higher than each other goal. So the main significance we found was communication and cohesion scored on average lower than pretty much every other goal externally, and you can see that on both directions. And then this is the same, though to a lesser extent on the internal survey. We picked out some of the more top rankings just to show by zip code and map. So here you can see taxes. You can see lowering taxes was a higher priority on the western side of the community and a lower priority on the eastern part of the community. But internally, it was a higher priority in the public safety area of the government and the lowest priority in public works. So this is our infrastructure goal. The highest ranking priorities for infrastructure areas were the bottom southeastern part of the county, the southern part of the county. And the lowest priority was the northeast part of the county. And then for infrastructure, the highest priority was given by general government departments and public works, lowest by community services and judicial. So the increasing safety and perception of safety, the lowest priority was given by the southeast corner of the unified government, and the highest priority was given by the western portion of the unified government. And then public safety ranked public safety the highest, and general government and judicial services ranked public safety or safety and perception and safety as the lower end of the goal. And then our last goal that we're going to go over is economy. So economy ranks the highest on the southern and eastern edge of town and ranked the lowest on the western side of town. And then economy ranked the highest priority on judicial and community services and the lowest priority by public safety respondents internally. And that is the end of our presentation.
Right.
Reggie, Michael, thank you all very much. A lot of work went into that, and we appreciate you bringing all this information together, as it's just really an extension of our public hearing process to get input from the public. We want to share that with all of you. If there are no questions on the survey, Mayor, our next section is to go over the American Rescue Plan. So Kathleen Von Atchen is back, and she will walk through the different steps in this process. It is still one that is unfolding, but we wanted to give you a little preliminary information on this evening. Kathleen?
Good evening. So Kathleen Von Atchen, Chief Financial Officer. So this is a wonderful new development for local government, and just wanted to give you a brief overview of the entirety of the bill. So as you know, President Biden signed the $1.9 trillion stimulus package called the American Rescue Plan Act. I'm going to refer to it as ARPA. And this is an image of generally how the 1.9 trillion is broken up by various services that the federal government will be providing assistance to. So this one down below here, this red $360 billion is going to state and local governments. But the 660-page act also includes a whole slew of other assistance programs, and that's where these come in here. So of course, you know, the stimulus checks are down here. Those are going out to individual taxpayers. So in order to help us wrap our head around all of this assistance, I've kind of broken it up into part one and part two. Part one are all of these allocations either to the state or direct federal grant applications that will address a long list of services to assist UG residents. So that's what all this section is. And then the part two are those direct payments, which are now estimated to be $89.5 million that will be directly paid to the unified government, both city and county, split between 2021 and 2022. So when we talk about ARPA, keep in mind that we need to kind of consider two strategies. Not only do we need to dedicate, you know, resources, staff time to ensure that we are collecting as much as we can from these various state and federal grant applications, but then we also need to evaluate how best to proceed with budgeting or allocating the 89.9 million we expect to receive very soon. So first, I'm going to talk about that part one. So part one, as I mentioned, are, you know, all the assistance opportunities, either through state allocations or federal grants. And I read through the 600-page bill, and I picked out all of the programs that we feel would the unified government would qualify for or assist our residents with. And it's not just unified government, but nonprofits as well. So for example, some of these boxes, you know, there's assistance to assist with our community gardens, with our healthcare workforce, new health centers, there's funding for that, funding for mental health, funding for homelessness, childcare. There's a number of programs in there to assist childcare facilities that were impacted last year during COVID to help them get back on their feet. There's funding for family violence and domestic violence. There's utility bill assistance for those households that had difficulty keeping up with their utility bills. There's funding for museums and libraries, for rental assistance to those residents that had difficulty keeping up with their rent. There's mortgage assistance. There's funding for transit, increased transit and bus lines to augment funding that was lost during the COVID, shutdown. There's a great deal of money in terms of grants, loans, and a whole variety of different programs for small businesses. There's funding to assist restaurants that closed during this past year to help them get back open. There's funding for funeral assistance to help residents that had funerals last year as a result of a loved one passing away due to COVID. There is funding through the Federal Emergency Management Association to reimburse for costs related to COVID. There's some funding for firefighter grants, both the SAFER grant and the Assistance to Firefighters grant program. There's funding for aging for those area agency on aging, and assistance for our nursing homes. So a lot of different programs. So I actually went through and looked at each of the individual programs, and of those part ones, they total $254 billion. And here's all of the various programs with their dollar amounts. So you can see there. And so here's a percentage of each of those programs. For example, 19% is for testing, contact tracing, and PPE. 15% is for childcare. 12%, is for public transportation, or no, probably vaccine distribution. No, yeah, public transportation. So, a lot of money for all these various services. And of course, this money is either being distributed through direct grants that we have to apply to the federal government, or funding that's being allocated to the state, and then the state will allocate it to the various counties and cities within the Kansas. So just doing a very rough estimate, because of course we don't know how much each of the states are going to be getting, or how much we don't really know how much will be made available by state. But if we were to look at the total of $254 billion, and if the UG were awarded just 1/10 of 1% of the $254 billion available across the country, it would mean that we would get 25 million more in resources to support small business, social services, public health, and all of these various programs. So not only are we getting this $89 million as a direct payment, but there's also opportunity, that we could, at a minimal level, get an additional 25 million to support all of these various activities. Okay. So I know, so the strategy for maximizing the amount of these allocations and grants is we're considering proposing considering a request for proposal for a consulting firm to assist us with technical assistance to UG staff to help us with cost recovery and emergency advisory services, to do an assessment, planning and decision making, to help us submit applications, review reimbursement requests, funding, cost reimbursement, and compliance and monitoring and reporting. So very comprehensive list that if we can hire a firm to help us, during this period on a temporary basis to help us maximize these funding opportunities, it would be great. And of course, the cost of the consulting services would be reimbursed from ARPA funding. And, we're also considering forming an internal staff or team to assist with the program administration and oversight. So now the second part is that direct payment that we're anticipating. It's totaling $89 million, but the split is between the city and then the county. So the city is estimated to receive $57.5 million, and the counties to receive $32 million. How the ARPA is written, the jurisdictions will be receiving these funds split between 2021 and 2022. So that's what these splits are here. So these direct payments, as I mentioned, they total $89.5 million, 2 tranches. The first tranche for 2021 is expected to be received in a week or two. And then the second tranche would come 12 months later, in the middle of next year. And of course, we will be securely depositing all of these funds into a grant fund until the UG budget process is completed. And then the law says that the funds must be used by December 31st, 2024. So we have 3 years to spend it. And so we have plenty of time to really evaluate how best to strategically budget this one-time money. So I just wanted to give you a little bit more detail on what guidelines we do have. These 4 guidelines are explicitly stated in the law itself, that 600-page document, but Treasury is right now still working on further guidance for the spending. But right now in the bill, it says that number 1, and this isn't necessarily required to be equally distributed, it's just a list of areas where you can spend. So, and not in rank order, it's just how it was listed. So, to respond to the COVID public health crisis through assisting households, small business, and nonprofits, or to aid industries impacted, such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. The second is to respond to workers who are performing essential work through making premium pay payments for essential workers currently working, as well as grants to essential workers who worked during the crisis. And this one is the third one here is lost revenue and the provision of government services. So we're the provisional services to the extent that the reduction in revenue was due to COVID-19. And then that lost revenue is compared to revenues collected prior to COVID hitting. And then the last category is infrastructure investment, where they specifically list water and sewer and broadband internet. Okay. The only restriction they had on these funds is that you can't use the money and deposit it into a pension fund, which in the state of Kansas would actually not be possible. So just want to give you a little information because we're still waiting to hear on Treasury and to get their guidelines, but they have been making some progress. On April 14th, Treasury created this Office of Recovery Programs to coordinate the disbursement. And they do have this website to manage their portion of the ARPA. And so in the meantime, they're working on 3 items, which is basically they're making sure that they have the right methodology, formulas, and census data. So the $89.5 million is an estimate that was provided to us over a month ago, but that may move or change depending on that analysis. They're establishing the rules on how the funding can be spent, including regulations for funding to cover lost revenue and other items such as water, road, and broadband infrastructure. And then they're, confirming banking information from all of us because, there's a large number of recipients. So $89.5 million is a lot of money. So we think this slide just kind of provides you with some suggested principles when you start thinking about ARPA direct payment budgeting. So the first item I just want to emphasize is that, we have 3 years to spend this money. So let's take the time to make really smart, careful, thought out, data-driven decisions. The second one here is that health experts are predicting that there will be a future health pandemic, that's likely to occur. So we need to keep that in mind, get ready now, make sure that we have everything in place to be able to respond adequately and successfully when that pandemic happens in the future. And of course, we want to make sure we're matching one-time stimulus dollars with one-time expenses. And similarly, we should try and avoid new assets or new programs, launching new programs that are going to drive increased costs in the future that we don't have ongoing money to cover for those operating costs. So, and then using an analogy from when you're in an airplane and they tell you about the mask, be sure to secure your own mask first before assisting others. And what I'm trying to get at here is that we need to replenish our reserves across all the funds in our organization to make sure that going forward we're ready to address any kind of unexpected pandemic or emergencies that may arise. And we should try and invest in areas that will reduce organizational costs, such as, since we have this unexpected resource, perhaps we should defer those costs towards deferred maintenance, because if paying for deferred maintenance ends up saving us money in the long term. And then lastly, consider undertaking cooperation with other regional projects. And throughout the bill, they talk greatly about social equity. It's a very important part of the bill. So we ought to consider all of our funding decisions through the lens of social equity. Spend money on social services and small businesses in a way that averts short-term disaster, but also commit resources for marginalized communities that were hurt by the crisis. So this is generally what a suggested kind of preliminary review process for these 89 million in direct payments. What we are suggesting here is that we first compare, of course, we're waiting on the guidelines, but we need to compare our current needs with the ARPA guidelines that are soon to come out, and then develop a criteria and prioritize our needs based on that criteria. And then we need to take all of those ideas that we have and assess their feasibility, their viability, and the timing of the projects. And then finally, we generally want to be able to evaluate all of this as part of this upcoming 2022 budget through some ARPA workshops, which we're still in, we haven't scheduled those, but we're looking to do that. It's all part of this upcoming 2022 budget. So I think that's all I got. So thank you. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Philbrook.
Well, I had to be the first to tell you, Kathleen, thank you so much for being on top of this. Oh my gosh. I know it's complicated as heck, kind of like when we went through the CARES Act thing. Fortunately, we got our feet wet on doing that, and everybody, administration, everybody really did a phenomenal job. And so I know you guys aren't going to do any less than what we did coming into the CARES Act money. Thank you so much for this presentation, and it gives me a little hope in knowing that we're going to be able to pay for some things that really need to be taken care of. And thanks again. And I know that we're going to be hearing a lot more from y'all in the near future. Thanks a bunch, Kathleen.
Commissioner Walters.
Thank you. I want to echo Jane's comments and congratulate Kathleen on surviving reading the document. Sounds like you have invested a lot of time in it. I appreciate the presentation. I do have a question. I didn't hear Bonner Springs or Edwardsville mentioned. And how are they on their own on this, or how will we coordinate with them, if at all? Has that been decided at any level?
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that Treasury is doing right now is here. I mentioned that here is that they're making sure. They're making sure that they have the right methodology, formulas, and census data in order. So the estimates that we received that bases that 89.5 million are based on information from, I think, OMB at the time, but they haven't released any updated estimates at this time. So that long list of all the jurisdictions and how much money they're getting, unfortunately, Edwardsville and Bonner Springs were not on the list. And so we have been talking with our federal lobbyists to find out what's going on there. And apparently, I'm just assuming that apparently whoever did that initial estimate assumed that as a unified government, that those jurisdictions were part of the unified government. And so, so we've been talking with the federal lobbyists about that. And we anticipate that there will be a re-estimate of the payments, and that Edwardsville and Bonner Springs will get their own after that estimate is revised. But we're working with the federal lobbyists, and I think maybe Doug might want to add a few comments. So
I would, Doug Bach, County Administrator, and to further clarify, all other jurisdictions the size of Bonner and Edwardsville get their allocation based on what goes to the state, and they designate out their specific amount of money. So they should have called them out separately so they would get it, and we should not have to share ours. One of the things they talked about specifically was for the city of Kansas City, Kansas, our allocation was based on our CDBG funding percentage. So that's just based on the percentage of population of Kansas City, Kansas. That's pretty clear that that's how they did our funding, and we're pushing that point pretty hard, that you just don't go and all at once add 12, 14,000 people to it and use the same formula. So that is one that is still being worked on, and we hope it'll be clarified. There were many jurisdictions like that were left out of the formula. So they're not the only two across the United States.
Yeah, the jurisdictions that got direct payment had populations in excess of 50,000 population. So they're called metro cities. So.
Thank you.
But your point here, to be clear, is that there is a way for Edwardsville and Bonner to access ARPA funding through the state. Is that correct?
That's how it should be done. Though all the other cities in the state of Kansas were called out in the ARPA program to say, this is how much money they'll get. Here's the amount of money that's going to Kansas, and here's how much each one of those jurisdictions should get. Bonner and Edwardsville were not on that list.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we are working to assist those communities to get that corrected. I know they're talking to them, and we're talking to who we can and letting our local delegation, well, they're aware of it.
All right, so we will expect regular updates, and we will, again, the horns that Commissioner Markley was speaking two. We will toot those when that money goes in the bank. All right, that concludes this is the last topic, Doug?
Yes, it is. We are done this evening.
All right.
And
all right.
I guess I would offer, Mayor, that the calendar we put forth earlier, that is one we would like to work with. So if commissioners have additional thoughts or things on that have come up, let us know. But we think that's in our best interest to work that way as we go through this year and not try to make any rash decisions in advance. And we can always lower, but if you don't utilize that, you can't use the revenues that have come in this year.
Correct. All right. Thank you. We are adjourned.